show you a technique that's used for unplying a 2-ply yarn. I call this the swivel technique because you use a fishing swivel to unply the yarn. For most of my classes, I use this yarn. It's Harrisville Highland, and it's a 2-ply yarn. There are many instances in which you may want to actually divide a 2-ply yarn in half, or perhaps a 4-ply yarn or 6-ply yarn. When you're doing something like the split weft technique to create a very straight line in your tapestry, you have to divide your yarn bundle. If you're using a yarn like this Harrisville Highland that's 2-ply, the best way to do that is just to divide it in half. If you're using a larger bundle of 4, 5, 6 smaller strands of yarn, obviously if they're singles yarn, you just use half of them for that technique. I also use this swivel technique extensively in my work with color gradation. And if you take one of my color gradation classes, you will go home with a swivel because it is such a useful tool in dividing a 2-ply yarn in half. To demonstrate this technique, I'm going to show you how I would unply both of these colors, and then if you're doing some color grading, you'll want to ply them back together. So I'll show you how to do that. For the split weft technique where you're making a straight line in your tapestry, you only need half of one of the bundles, so you won't be plying them back together. To start with, you'll need 2 lengths of yarn, one of each color, if you're going to do the gradation technique. If you're just unplying the yarn, you just need 1 piece of yarn. A short length works better to start with. When you get more familiar with this technique, you can have a piece of yarn as long as the room that you're standing in, and you can unply it. But I would start with no more than a couple yards. So take your first piece of yarn, and we're going to attach it to a swivel. I have here a number 5 200-pound test fishing swivel. I assume these are used for really big fish. I can't find them in my local fishing store in New Mexico. I order them online. So you tie one of the ends of this swivel to a solid piece of something, a loom or a spool rack or something that isn't going to move, or nail it to your wall, and then put a slip knot on the other ring on the other side. So just tie a slip knot so you can get that off again. Back to the end of your yarn and untwist the end. You're going to pull those 2 plies apart, and what the swivel does is allows the yarn to untwist without tangling. You see, sometimes you have to shake it a little bit to get it to go. You get to the end and you have 2 nicely unplied bundles of yarn. Now, lay those down, and if you're going to actually mix 2 colors of yarn, pick up your other piece of yarn that was the same length as the first one you did. Unply it again. Pull the 2 ends apart and allow that spinner to spin. Take one of each of those 2 bundles, this is if you're mixing the colors, and put the ends together. And you're going to hold the 2 bundles in one hand and pinch with a finger. So I'm holding the bundles here, and I am allowing the yarn here to twist back together. The yarn has a memory, so it will reply itself, although it is not identical to the machine plied yarn, of course. So let the end dangle and watch it spin. Then you'll have a yarn that is a mix of the 2 colors that you just unplied and plied back together. Here's a close-up of putting those 2 bundles together. So I've pulled apart 2 different colors of purple, and I want to mix them, probably because I'm going to create a gradation of some kind. So you take the 2 ends, I'm going to hold the bundles here in my fist, and I'm just going to tug them out a little bit at a time. Let them twist back together. The yarn has memory, and it will twist back into applied yarn. At least this Harrisville Highland will. Again, just pull out enough that they're all straight, there's no little loops. Let it twist back together. Here's the swivel that I'm using. It's not a split ring, it's a solid ring swivel, and I don't think it really matters which end you tie to the solid piece. Take the end of your yarn and put it through the other end, and I tie this kind of a slip knot. I just bring it around and pull a loop through, leaving your tail. When you get to the end, you can just flip that tail off and pull the yarn out. Okay, when you're starting to unply a length of yarn with the swivel technique, start a couple inches from the end of the yarn and untwist it from there. I can see where the 2 plies are, and I stick my fingernail between them. Grab the other one and pull out towards the end. That's much easier for this, and if you're splicing yarn while you're weaving, than if you try to pick the end apart and twist. Okay, from here, hold each ply between your thumb and index finger. Start to pull apart a little bit. Hook with your pinky around each of the plies. Rotate your hand and pinch again. So I'm creating little loops here between my pinky and my thumb and index finger. And I'm going to let go with my pinky. Hold on to the rest of the loops with your thumb and index finger. Keep unplying, hook, pinch, hook, pinch, hook, pinch. And at the end, you have a little bundle of yarn between your thumb and index finger in each hand, and you just untie that little slip knot, and you have 2 small bundles of yarn. Here's a close-up of the kind of swivel that I'm using. This is actually an SPRO ball bearing swivel. I got these at Cabela's, but you could get them a lot of different places. It's a size 5, 200-pound test, and they're about $7 or $8 for 2 of them. I've tried larger sizes. I've tried a number 8. It's easier to get the yarn hooked into the bigger ones, but they don't spin as well. I don't recommend the 8. The 6s work pretty well, so I would recommend a size 5 or a size 6 ball bearing swivel, and you don't need the split ring kind. You can just get the welded rings.